I arrived late. Not deliberately, though perhaps some hidden corner of me arranged it so. Delay can be its own armor. When you stall, you buy yourself a little distance, a pocket of silence before stepping into the noise. Outside, I lingered beneath the pines, my breath blooming white in the cold, pretending that I needed one more minute to steady myself. In truth, I needed to taste the dark before I drowned in the light of that lodge. The house glowed like an illustration pulled from a winter calendar, almost too perfect to be real. Every window poured out amber light. Every branch glittered with ice, the roof outlined in frost like piping on a cake. The driveway was a museum of familiar cars, my uncle's pickup with its dented bumper, my aunt's van with the baby sticker faded on the glass, even my sister's sleek sedan that looked too polished for gravel. Their roofs all wore neat white caps of snow as though someone had curated this tableau for a visitor passing by. To that stranger, the scene would have been enviable warmth, tradition, belonging. Through the wide front windows, I saw shadows moving in choreographed intimacy, a head thrown back in laughter, a hand brushing against another's arm. Gestures exaggerated as if even their bodies rehearsed the part of family united. From a distance, it looked like joy-abundant bonds unbreakable. Yet I had learned slowly and at cost that warmth can be a disguise for fire. From afar, it glows inviting. Step closer and it scorches. I placed my hand on the door handle, cold metal biting my skin. I told myself I would walk in as if I belonged. I would not shrink, not falter. But as the door swung open, silence hit the room like a fallen frame shattering glass. Conversations froze mid-breath. Heads turned eyes fixed. Not the lazy wave of "you're late," not the quick lean in for an embrace. No. What I received was the peculiar hush of a presence unwelcomed, a hush that spreads not from affection but from alarm. And then, almost too quickly, sound resumed. As if a director clapped the clapperboard and the actors found their lines again. Laughter restarted, voices rose, glasses clinked. The show must go on. But that brief stillness clung to me like smoke. Inside, the scent of roast and mulled wine filled the air, but it lay cold against my skin. Eyes betray faster than mouths. Smiles bloomed, but brittle, all porcelain glaze and no flesh. My cousin's laugh rang out, but her gaze slid across me as if I were an inanimate object misplaced in the room. My mother raised her glass to her lips, but not her eyes to my face. My sister leaned close to her husband, whispering something that made him chuckle, low sharp like a knife sheathing itself. I told myself, breathe. Walk like you belong. Perform the role they refuse to write you into. But the floorboards creaked beneath my shoes as if they knew better, as if the house itself betrayed me. Then my gaze caught the table. The long dining table stretched nearly the entire room, a monument draped in linen and silver. Candles flickered in the center, throwing light onto crystal goblets, bowls heaped with food plates waiting like open hands. Every place was set with precision forks aligned like soldiers. Napkins folded into delicate origami name cards in elegant gold script. I scanned each one. Mary, Peter, Evelyn, Clara, Daniel. Names lined up like credentials, as if the table itself was a roll call of belonging. And then nothing. No card for me. No waiting chair. It was small enough to dismiss as an oversight if one was inclined toward mercy. But I knew better. I had lived too long in this theater to mistake rehearsal for accident. Every detail here was curated, every gesture deliberate. The missing card was not paper. It was judgment. Not omission, declaration. I stood too long staring at that blank space, at the way the two chairs on either side leaned fractionally closer together, closing the gap my absence created. A throat cleared. Someone murmured, "Must have been a mistake," but their lips curved, betraying amusement. I smiled the kind of smile you give when insult comes, gift-wrapped as error, and said lightly, "No worries, I prefer to stand." That earned a burst of polite laughter, brittle and brief, the kind that sustains itself on another's humiliation. To them, the moment dissolved back into chatter, but for me it burned bright sour at the root of my tongue. I drifted toward the fireplace, pretending admiration for the decorations. Garlands wound across the mantel stockings, embroidered with initials, ornaments, catching firelight in their fractured glass. The entire room was designed to resemble affection, togetherness, legacy. Yet it felt like a stage set painted wood hollow at the core. From the corner of my eye, I caught their glances. Not hatred that would have been too human to alive. Hatred acknowledges the other's weight, the threat they pose. What I saw was colder, cleaner, the look reserved for a misplaced object tolerated only until it can be cleared away. The absurdity nearly made me laugh. Here they all were actors committed to their roles, rehearsing lines of affection, clinking glasses on cue. And here I was, the unscripted element, the reminder that not every story fits the family myth. The irony nearly pulled a smile from me, though not the kind they would have welcomed. I let their noise wash over me like water around stone. Bits of conversation rose and fell, a cousin's promotion, a nephew's soccer trophies, an aunt's new car. Each sentence delivered like a line from a script, practiced familiar. No one asked me about my year. No one asked me anything at all. I was furniture, a misplaced chair without a name card, upright only by sheer stubbornness. And yet there is a kind of power in being excluded. Distance grants clarity. From outside the circle, you can see the choreography more clearly, the sly nudges of cruelty, hidden beneath the manners, the ways affection is rationed like currency. I lifted my glass, let the bitter drink settle in my throat, and thought they believed they have silenced me, erased me. But silence is not absence. Silence is observation. The windows behind me reflected the room, duplicating the false warmth twice over. Outside, the snow glowed beneath the flood of light. Inside, the cold air hid beneath perfume and roast. And between the two, I stood tasting both realities. Warmth without cold within. Perfect symmetry. Perfect lie. Dinner began like a play, each performer sliding into their role as though cued by an unseen director. Knives scraped plates. Glasses chimed, and the rhythm of chewing and swallowing filled the gaps. Conversation could not. There was chatter, yes, but it was the kind of chatter that tries too hard. Laughter pitched a fraction higher than natural compliments sharpened into blades the moment they were spoken. The script had been rehearsed long before I arrived, and the actors knew their cues. My chair had no name card. They dragged it into place at the far end of the table, a seat of convenience, its distance from the center both practical and symbolic. Far enough that my mother could avoid my gaze, far enough that my sister's laughter could travel to me only after softening into echoes. From there, I could see the whole stage, the sweep of chandeliers casting their manufactured glow, the candles turning polished smiles into something almost human. I sat, hands folded back straight, the role assigned to me clear, not participant but observer. Not family, but audience. The first needle came wrapped in velvet. "You look well," my aunt said, tilting her head as though I were a specimen under glass. "Healthier. Rest must be good for you." Rest. That was her word for exile, for the silence I had carved between us. Rest was her word for refusal. The refusal to barter favors, to buy affection with endless sacrifice. In her mouth, healthier was not a compliment. It was a reminder that once in their eyes I had been sick. Sick with failure. Sick with stubbornness. Sick with not being who they demanded I be. I smiled because that is the ritual. My fork pressed too hard against porcelain and the squeak rang sharp in the air. No one acknowledged it. No one ever does. The second needle slipped in, smoothly delivered with all the finesse of gossip disguised as pride. My cousin leaned into her circle of admirers, her voice pitched just loud enough to bridge the distance to me. "It's wonderful how everyone is thriving. Promotions, new homes, little victories. The family really has so much to be proud of." She began naming names like rosary beads, each one blessed aloud, each achievement strung like proof of worth. I listened, waiting certain my name would appear. Surely she would not leave me out in so public a recitation. But bead by bead, name by name, the prayer ended without me. Silence filled the space where my name should have been louder than any word. Then came the speech. The centerpiece of every meal, my mother lifting her glass, her posture immaculate, her voice clear. She praised her children plural, though her gaze did not once touch me. She praised her nieces, nephews, grandchildren, all strung together in a glittering chain of pride. She spoke their successes as if reading headlines from a newspaper where she herself was editor-in-chief. But in this edition, I had been cut. My name excised like a paragraph that ruined the flow. A clean edit. A narrative correction. I chewed in silence, my food turning dry as paper, my throat tightening with every swallow. Outwardly, I smiled, lips curved politely, nodding at the right places. Inwardly, the words stacked like bricks, each one heavy, each one closing me further inside a wall I would never allow to crumble. And then came the line that still echoes like a curse. My uncle, or perhaps a cousin time, has blurred the precise bloodline. Estrangement has a way of turning relatives into strangers. With shared features, set down his glass with theatrical precision and said, "You know, it's remarkable. Brilliant, really. To have so much talent, so much potential, and yet do absolutely nothing with it." The room paused, waiting for the punchline. And then the laughter came. Not a wave, but coins tossed into the air, scattered tinkling, too many to count. Some laughed nervously, unsure if cruelty was safe to endorse. Most laughed freely, because in my family, cruelty disguised as wit was not only tolerated, it was sport. They laughed because it was easier than protest. They laughed because in that moment, I was the designated absence, the target everyone could aim at without consequence. They laughed because it bound them together, their mockery, the glue of their belonging. I lowered my eyes to my plate, studying the potatoes I had barely touched. My fork moved mechanically, lift pierce, lower chew. Outwardly silence. Inwardly fire. His words etched themselves into me with surgical accuracy, brilliant but did nothing. The phrase replayed mantra of disdain, rhythm of dismissal. What they never understood is that silence is not forgetting. Silence is storage. Silence is archive. Every insult, every smirk, every sharpened compliment disguised as kindness filed away, catalogued meticulously. Waiting. The meal pressed forward relentless. Platters arrived and were passed with exaggerated politeness. Compliments traded like coins. "You've lost weight. Your children are angels, such a success you've become." Glittering phrases hollow as tinsel, each one meant to shine only on the surface. I watched them because that was my role. To sit at the far edge of the stage and record. The table was theater, the food, a set piece, the guests, actors auditioning for approval. I was the audience who had not bought a ticket. And in watching, I saw the cracks. My sister's hand tightening around her husband's arm when another woman's promotion was mentioned. My cousin's smile faltering when inheritance was hinted at. My mother's voice cracking on the word together, just soft enough for others to miss, sharp enough for me to hear. It was a carnival of masks, a masquerade without music. At one point, my brother-in-law leaned across the table, pretending to include me. "Still writing, are you?" His tone was light, but his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a blade. "Yes," I said simply. "Good," he replied. "It's nice to have hobbies." Hobbies? The word landed like ice water. As though the work that sustained me, that filled my nights, that kept me alive when silence threatened to drown me, was no more than knitting scarves on idle afternoons. Another needle, inserted cleanly, twisted with care. I breathed slowly, evenly. I would not bleed for them. Around me, the performance peaked. Glasses raised again and again, toasts delivered like soliloquies, laughter swelling like canned applause. The room pulsed with noise. To them, it was celebration. To me, it was spectacle theater without art. For years, I had mistaken this noise for love. For years, I thought belonging was measured by chairs at tables, by names spoken in speeches, by nods of acknowledgement. But seated here beneath chandeliers that gilded my erasure, I saw clearly this was not family. This was pageantry. This was spectacle. And I was not a participant. I was the spectator. No one invited the witness. They tried to edit out the record keeper who returned again and again, silent, watchful, writing it all down. The meal dragged on each course, another act, each toast, another curtain rise. And through it all, the needles kept coming. Small enough to pass unnoticed by those not pierced sharp enough to leave me bleeding beneath my skin. Yet even as they erased me, I wrote them. Each barb, each omission, each jest, disguised as care, etched, preserved, immortal. Because silence, though, it looks like surrender is sometimes strategy. And I was learning slowly, painfully, deliberately to turn their stage into my story. The hallway held a different weather than the dining room, cool, honest, almost kind. Carpet muted my steps. The air smelled faintly of cedar polish instead of roast and wine. At the end, the old oval mirror waited in its dark frame glass, a little mottled with age. As a child, I'd practiced apologies there. I'm sorry I didn't mean to. I'll do better watching my own mouth learn shapes that never bought forgiveness. I'd practice smiles too. Those tidy crescents that fit other people's expectations better than they fit my face. Now the mirror returned someone I finally recognized. Not triumphant, not broken finished. The party murmured behind me like a far tide, and I felt no undertow. Something in me clicked into place, done as a decision, not a collapse. The click felt small, domestic, even like a drawer finally sliding true on its rails. I stood with the mirror a moment longer, listening to my breathing even out. The hall light hummed. From the dining room came a glassy laugh that struck the air and fell apart. I touched the console table, the same scratched walnut, the same bowl of decorative pine cones that had never seen a forest, and felt the cool edge steady my hand. Done, I told the mirror me, and the mirror me did not flinch. I turned back with steady hands, planning only to take my coat, my notes, my ledger. I would leave without spectacle, a clean cut rather than a tear. But the first thing I saw in the living room was absence. The coffee table where I'd left the black book was empty, save for crumbs, a water ring, a gold candy wrapper folded into a star. The star made me smile how eager this house was to dress waste as celebration. Then a torn scrap beneath the sofa ragged edge showing like a cuticle. 0612, $1, $200, camp deposit, Vela's twins paid in full. Another shred near the rug fringe, half hidden under a tassel. 0904, $3,500 ER copay and post-op meds, mother receipts in folder B. I crouched and saw more fragments glinting like a bleak confetti trail car repair. A bridge loan, antibiotics deductibles, a line about a busted hot water heater I'd forgotten until that moment. Not celebration. Erasure in progress. My ledger had been opened, leafed, and dismantled, context torn from proof, so the whole could be dismissed as scraps. Old notes, misremembered figures. I gathered the pieces, calmly arranging them by date, the way muscle memory wanted me to. Calm is sometimes a choice. Sometimes it's simply the only clean tool left. I didn't need to turn to know she was there. Rosewater announced my mother before her shadow crossed the floor. Her perfume has always arrived before her arguments. Looking for something mild, almost musical, the tone she used for priests and doctors. My ledger. Ledger. A prim little frown. We don't keep tabs here. Someone kept them well enough to find and tear. I tidied, she said, gaze sliding to the naked table. It looked messy. Tidy is one word, I answered. Destruction is another. Her chin lifted a fraction. The choreography was old injured dignity as defense. Family doesn't keep tabs. Family helps. Family forgives. We don't itemize milk. This isn't milk. I tapped a strip with my index finger. Camp when Vela's card declined. The ambulance you refused without my promise to pay. Seed money a bank wouldn't give Daniel. I laid the shreds in a neat line the way bones become a spine. These aren't tabs. They're bones. Records are the skeleton of truth. You make everything ugly, she murmured gently. Weaponized. Can't we celebrate without your files? Your speech celebrated everyone but the person you're asking not to keep track. You're sensitive. I'm accurate. A breath moved through her, shallow and quick. It looked like clutter, she said, as if explanation could substitute for apology. Clutter is what you call the past when it won't obey your editing, I said. I asked for the cover. Disposed. She said too quickly, then correcting herself with a brittle smile. In the past, that was the point, a stack is forgettable. A bound book has a title. A stack can be lost. A book can be found. I won't act in your theater, I said quietly. I won't forget for you. I set my bag on the table and unzipped it. From it, I took the things years had taught me to carry: a phone with a clean lens, brightness bumped to catch faint print, A palm-sized scanner that hummed like a polite insect. A flash drive shaped like a key. Belt and suspenders, some would say. Survival kit, I would say. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said, glancing toward the dining room as if the walls had ears. "I'm documenting." I flattened each torn strip with the side of my thumb, breathed on the curled edges to warm them. True photographed, scanned, saved, then backed up again. Evidence is a mercy, not for them, for me. I toggled airplane mode so no helpful relative could accidentally ping the phone mid-transfer. I checked metadata time date location to lock the images to this night, this room. Lines reassembled into a spine of dates and amounts and small margin notes, rain driveway hug. You're a lifesaver. The texture of care made visible at last. The scanner took them in with a soft whir chunk, returning each fragment to me as a small, undeniable ghost. My sister drifted in, saw the table, rolled her eyes with theater-wide precision. "Still about money," she said, airy as powdered sugar. "It was about responsibility," I said. "Money was the way it asked to be measured. Maybe if you'd asked for thanks, I did." I let the period sit between us like a stone. There was nothing further to say to a room with no oxygen. Aunt Em poked her head in, read the air retreated with the speed of someone evading a draft. In the dining room, a toast rose, clinked, fell. I thought suddenly of every time I'd left a hospital receipt in a kitchen drawer here, telling myself I'd file it later. Of every time they'd told me you're a saint and then taken my name off the guest list of stories told to neighbors. The ledger had been the one thing I kept for myself a spine against forgetting. That they tore it made sense. Tearing is what editors do to paragraphs that don't flatter them. "Where is the cover?" I asked again, not looking up from the scanner's soft light. "In the trash," she said then. "In the past." The correction was reflex language, trying to lift reality out of reach. "That's the difference," I said. "The past is a location. The trash is a decision." She watched my hands. "You'll regret this," she said, quieter now, the stage voice sliding off her like a coat. "It will isolate you." "It will locate me," I said. "That's different." I saved the scans to the drive, then to a second cloud account whose name no one here would recognize, then exported a PDF with page numbers, date stamps, a title, record of care house fragments reconstructed. Redundancy is a boundary. I set a passphrase I wouldn't forget, 2 words from a poem I loved, one from a street I'd lived on, one from the name of a plant I kept alive despite its doubt. The small rituals steadied me more than any speech ever had. A child's laugh broke on the far side of the wall. Someone told a joke about a neighbor. The ordinary had the gall to continue while I stitched the torn into the saved. That is what the ordinary does. It refuses to notice the seam while it's being sewn. My mother sat at last, not from surrender, but from the fatigue of performing. Keeping score makes love transactional. She tried again, reciting the liturgy. Refusing the receipt makes love coercive, I said. If you wanted grace, you could have asked. You wanted silence dressed as grace. You wanted my proof to be invisible so your story could be clean. She shook her head with a tiny pity. You used to be so loving. I used to be so available, I said. That's not love. That's supply. Her mouth tightened. For a beat, I thought she would apologize, not for tearing, not for voting, but for the long, small attritions that had made tearing feel inevitable. The moment passed. She glanced toward the doorway, located her audience, and when she turned back, her voice had that lacquer again. Come back to the table, she said. Stop making a scene. No, I said, and felt the word seat itself in the floorboards. Scenes are what happen out there. I nodded toward the dining room. This is an archive. The scanner gave one final hum and went quiet. I slipped each photographed strip into a new plastic sleeve from my bag and sealed the seam with a firm press. I labeled an envelope in careful block letters, Ledger House copy torn. The parentheses were exactly right, an acknowledgement of damage without surrendering meaning. I stood and slid the envelope into my bag. My mother watched the movement like watching a door she could no longer lock. What will it buy you? She asked, not unkindly, and I almost loved her for the honesty of that question. The right to stop asking for acknowledgement from people who only deal in erasure, I said. and the right to remember without permission. In the doorway to the dining room, the air folded around me with its buttered pretense, candles softening faces into something that almost looked kind, glasses winking silver chiming in rhythms that once sounded like safety. I did not sit. I placed my hands on the back of the nameless chair and felt how light my palms were. I found my ledger, I said. Part of it. A ripple, a practiced confusion. We were just saying grace, my mother lied with the smoothness of a well-thumbed card. Then keep it, I said. Grace travels faster without me. I took my coat from the rack. The mirror caught me in passing, and I met my own eyes, gave a small nod, a pact, not a pep talk. On the porch, the night's cold felt like honesty, clean and exact. The moon cut the snow into plains of white. The driveway purred faintly with distant traffic. I photographed the house time date location, not for nostalgia, but for record. I stepped sideways and took a second frame to diminish the glare, a third to include the porch light. Evidence is a line you can hold when memory goes soft. At the car, I set the envelope on the passenger seat as if settling something alive that needed a careful ride. The engine woke with a low, steady thrum. Warm air lifted the frost from the windshield in pale streaks. I opened the Notes app and typed, "Next steps replace cover." Title, the new book, Record of Care. Offsite backup, complete account. Encrypt PDF, store passphrase separately. Photograph, hallway mirror tomorrow, add to house artifacts. Share with no one unless asked with honesty in writing. I looked once at the bright windows. I wished them nothing. I simply named them a stage. My car was not a stage. It was a means of leaving. I shifted into drive. Snow hushed the tires. A message buzzed. I let it wait. The trees stood along the road like a jury I no longer feared because I had finally brought exhibits. The night opened clean as a ledger page, and I drove into it, hands steady on the wheel. Heat on low, the envelope breathing quietly beside me. Done is a decision, I thought, the kind that locks gently, reliably, the way a door closes when it's finally hung straight. And the record at last is mine. The lights dimmed and the projector hummed to life. A white rectangle bloomed across the far wall, swallowing the flicker of candles. I knew the ritual well. Every year, someone stitched together photographs into a slideshow, a moving family album meant to prove our unity to ourselves. The images were curated with care, each frame a token of belonging, proof that we were not just blood, but memory. The first slide appeared a childhood Christmas wrapping paper, torn and glittering, my cousins shrieking in delight around a pile of toys. The room chuckled at how small and silly they once looked. Then another graduation's caps flung into the air. Weddings, laughter frozen mid-bouquet toss. Vacations, beaches, ski trips, birthdays with frosted cakes. I waited for myself to appear. I waited through decades of life displayed in still frames. But when my own history should have entered the summers, I had funded the gatherings, I had cooked for the holidays, I had photographed myself. There was nothing. A frame skipped here, another skipped there. A gathering where I knew I had stood on the edge of the photo, cropped out as neatly as trimming fat from meat. A reunion where my shoulders should have been visible in the background, erased with the precision of software or scissors. The room laughed, applauded, clapped along to the chosen music track. I sat motionless, my face touched by the false glow of moments I had lived, but now saw rewritten. It was worse than not being remembered, it was being deleted. The slideshow rolled forward as if I had never existed, and the only witness to the deletion was me. I felt no pang of grief this time, no sharp stab of outrage. The earlier needles of the night had already drained me of shock. What remained was observation, clinical and cold. I was watching an archive vandalized in plain sight. The projector threw its light on the wall, and in that light my absence was brighter than my presence could ever have been. When the show ended, applause rose, glasses lifted. To family, someone toasted as if the screen had proven something sacred. I excused myself quietly and walked to the edge of the hallway, phone already in hand. My screen glowed with the family group chat, buzzing with messages from earlier in the week. There it was, the request. Mom, we'll need you to co-sign for Daniel's loan, just a formality. He's got the rest lined up. Cousin Vela. Yes, it would mean so much. It's just paperwork. "Uncle, you're the responsible one. Banks love your name." A chorus of expectation dressed as affection. I had answered with a single line, "Me no." That had been it. No explanation, no apology, just refusal. Scrolling further, I found what I hadn't seen until tonight. A screenshot forwarded by accident or perhaps by the clumsy arrogance of someone certain I would never see it. Cousin Daniel in a side chat with Mother and Vela. She'll say yes. She always does. She's easy to play. 4 words, that was all. 4 words that crystallized everything the ledger had hinted at, everything the mirror had shown me, everything the slideshow had erased. She's easy to play. The sentence was a scalpel, small, precise, and devastatingly effective. My role in their theater exposed in a line of text. Not family, not partner, not even pawn. Just a piece to be moved by anyone who bothered to ask. I read it twice. 3 times. I felt the words lodge into me like cold iron. But again, no tears, no raised pulse. Something deeper had shifted. Not sadness. Not rage. Certainty. I opened my bag and drew out the scanner, the same one I had used in the living room. I scanned the message on my phone screen, then took a screenshot, then emailed it to myself twice under 2 different subject lines. The discipline of preservation steadied me. Redundancy, safety evidence. I returned to the coffee table where the fragments of the ledger still waited, now flattened and neatly stacked. The projector light from the slideshow had left the wall blank again, as though erasure were complete. But my table was no blank wall. My table was a record. Piece by piece, I fed the torn papers into the scanner again, rescanning what I had already preserved, this time adding metadata. Cross-check with slideshow omission. The device hummed softly, patient and tireless. I slipped the new scans into a folder on my drive and titled it Family, Evidence Archive. Inside, I created subfolders, Ledger, Slideshow, Group Chat. The act was not bitter. It was mechanical. I was not clawing at memory anymore, not pleading with anyone to see me. I was building an archive the way an historian builds one, carefully, methodically, without expectation of applause. For years, my family had told me that keeping records was petty, that tallying debts was unloving, that silence was grace. But silence had been their strategy. Silence had been their tool. And now silence was mine, sharpened into action. The folder blinked up at me from the screen. Contained within it were not just numbers or screenshots, but the shape of a truth too heavy for performance to erase. The slideshow might delete me from photographs. The speeches might omit my name. The jokes might reduce me to a punchline. But the archive did not care for applause or denial. The archive simply held. I zipped the folder, encrypted it, and uploaded it to 3 separate clouds. I copied it onto 2 different drives. One went into my bag. The other I slid into my coat pocket, light as a coin, but heavier than any toast that would be spoken in the next room. From the dining room, I heard another cheer, another toast. The music picked up again. Laughter stitched itself into the air. The party resumed without interruption, proof that my absence was as easy to play as my presence had been. But this time, I was not their understudy, not their easy mark. I was the keeper of the record. I closed the laptop. No emotion, no trembling, just action. When I rose, I did not glance at the mirror in the hall. I did not need to. I already knew what it would show, a figure not erased, not fragile, not even defiant. Just finished. Done. The projector clicked off and the wall returned to blankness. But my archive remained living in places no one at that table could touch, and for the first time, their erasure did not erase me. The second dinner felt heavier before it even began. The same lodge, the same glittering lights glowing like chandeliers in a theater. The same table arranged with an almost military precision, but beneath all of it ran a hum of tension, low and electric, like an underground wire waiting to snap. Even in the entryway, I could hear it. Voices pitched just a little too high, laughter that tried a fraction too hard, silverware clattering against plates with a sharpness that betrayed nerves. It was not just a meal. It was a performance rehearsed behind curtains, the lines already written, the ending already decided. Something had shifted since the first night. The air smelled of roast and cinnamon. Yes, but underneath was something metallic acrid. Expectation has a scent, and I could smell it. They had planned something. That much was clear. Once again, my seat was dragged to the margin. A chair without a name card stationed at the farthest edge like a piece of furniture that did not quite belong to the set. That chair was louder than any speech. Its distance was not just physical. It was verdict. I sat with my bag beside me. Heavy. Weighted not with clothes or gifts, but with the folder I had built piece by piece year after year. Ledgers, receipts, transfers, deeds, titles. Evidence bound in paper and ink. A record so meticulous it could survive fire. I let it rest unopened on the floor at my side. A sealed weapon, patient, waiting. Dinner unfolded like syrup poured too slowly, thick and heavy, clinging to every surface. Toasts rose. Glasses clinked. Voices swelled. The slideshow from the first night where I had been cut from the family story as cleanly as a photograph cropped still played in the back of my mind. And the chat message, "She's easy to play," burned across my memory like scar tissue. I had healed over it, but the mark remained hard and clear. Tonight was no longer about omission. Tonight was about verdict. It happened in the middle of the main course when the wine had loosened tongues and conversation buzzed like bees too fat to fly. My sister, always the bold one, always the loud one, rose to her feet. She tapped her glass with her spoon, the clear ting-ting-ting slicing through the chatter. The room hushed obedient. Her smile was wide, practiced, gleaming with satisfaction. She raised her glass high. Her eyes, bright with triumph, scanned the table until they settled on me. And with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed the line 100 times in her mirror, she said, "We voted, and you're not family anymore." The words landed on the table like a stone dropped into shallow water, first the splash, then the ripples. For a heartbeat, there was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then the sound came. A few nervous titters. A couple of claps, hesitant at first, then bolder, growing until it resembled applause. The performance demanded it. I sat unmoving. My fork rested on my plate, abandoned. My skin felt the air press against it like iron. Her words did not shock me. They only confirmed what had been true for years. They had been voting all along, in omissions and deletions, in the laughter that cut instead of embraced. Tonight, they only made their verdict public. I rose slowly. The room stilled. Laughter caught in throats like fishhooks. I did not raise a glass. I did not tap for attention. I reached down, lifted my bag, unzipped it, and pulled out the folder. Thick, black, heavy with truth. I walked to the center of the table, to the stage they believed was theirs alone, and placed it on the linen. The thud of its spine striking wood was louder than any toast. "I brought something too," I said. My voice was calm. Calm like a blade before it cuts. I opened the folder. Paper whispered as I spread the first set of documents. Bank transfers. Photocopies of checks, screenshots of transactions annotated with dates, memos, signatures. June 12th, $1, $200 for Vela's twin summer camp. September 4th, $3,500 for mother's post-surgery care. February 19th, $8,000 for Daniel's homebrew startup, which, if I recall, was supposed to be repaid the next month. Eyes darted. A throat cleared. A cousin smirked, nervous. My brother-in-law leaned forward, curiosity flickering into fear. I turned another page. July 1st, $950 for Daniel's car repair. December 18th, $40, $300 for mother's probate lawyer. May 29th, $1,780 for physical therapy. August 21st, $2,000 for a mortgage catch-up that never cleared. I looked up. Let silence sharpen the air. Shall I go on? The paper snapped like a whip as I flipped another page. This is not a ledger of favors. This is a record of erasure. You took, and when the time came to remember, you erased. When you made your slideshow, you cut me out of the frame. When you gave your speeches, you cut my name from your mouths. And tonight, you made it official. A vote. A declaration. You're not family anymore. I paused. Silence pooled heavy, filling every corner of the room. Fine, I said at last. Then let the record show what family meant before you voted me out. I drew out the next stack. Ownership papers, legal documents, titles with my name inked in places they had conveniently forgotten. This is the spa license I co-signed for Evelyn. This is the deed where my name appears because Daniel begged me to back him with the bank. These, I fanned them wide like cards in a game they had already lost, are the papers that prove I was never absent. I was never invisible. I was your foundation, your guarantor, the shadow that held up your applause. The room shifted restless. My brother-in-law's face drained pale as he recognized his own name on one of the pages. My mother's lips pressed together a brittle smile that cracked under the weight of fear. Family doesn't keep tabs. She whispered, voice brittle, the old refrain she had used to bind me to silence. Family doesn't erase, I answered. Family doesn't crop you out of photos. Family doesn't laugh while you're cut from the story. Family doesn't declare votes like banishments from a kingdom built on borrowed money. Then I lifted the page I had saved for last. A screenshot of the group chat, enlarged, printed in black ink, the line bold as a scar across white paper. She's easy to play. This I said, raising it high so all could see is what you think of me. Not sister, not daughter, not cousin, just easy to play. And tonight you proved it. But let me remind you, I am not erased. I am archived. Gasps broke out small and sharp. One cousin grabbed their wine glass like a shield. My brother-in-law cursed under his breath. My mother half rose, hand outstretched, her soothing tones practiced and ready. It's a misunderstanding, she said quickly. A joke badly phrased. You know how messages look out of context. Context, I cut her off. Context is 30 years of silence and demand. Context is the chair without a name card. Context is your laughter when he said I did nothing with my brilliance. Context is your applause when she declared I wasn't family anymore. Don't speak to me about context. The room went rigid. The only sounds were the buzz of the overhead light and the steady ticking of the clock. I slid forward the last stack of papers. Official letters, stamped, signed, addressed. These are the filings already sent. To the bank, to the licensing board, to the property office. I am withdrawing my authorizations. Where my name once bought you grace, it now brings you scrutiny. Where my silence once covered your debts, it now exposes them. A sharp inhale. A cousin muttered a prayer. My mother's hand twitched, hovering above the folder as if she could close it. End it, rewrite it. I pressed my palm flat over the documents. No, I said. You don't get to close this. Not anymore. My sister, still standing, glass trembling in her hand, stared at me. The triumph had drained from her face. She looked less like a victor now, and more like a gambler who had bet everything and realized the house always wins. You can laugh, I said, sweeping my gaze across them all. You can clap. You can toast. But the record stands. This archive exists beyond your vote. You cannot erase me from the documents I signed. You cannot crop me from the transfers I made. You cannot vote me out of the truth. I closed the folder with a snap loud as a gavel. I accept your vote, I said. I am not your family anymore. And because of that, you no longer have my name. You no longer have my silence. You no longer have my protection. The words hung heavy, heavier than the chandeliers above, sharper than any toast that night. No one moved. The air seemed to collapse inward, heavy with shock. My mother's hand froze above the table. My brother-in-law's eyes darted, calculating, cornered. My sister swallowed hard, her glass still trembling. I lifted the bag, slid the folder back inside, and slung it over my shoulder. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. There was no triumph, no grief. Only finality. I turned toward the hallway. And before I left, I spoke one last line, clear, unbroken, final. The archive will speak louder than your applause. And then I walked out their fractured silence, clinging to me like a second skin, following me down the hall and out into the cold. The dining room was no longer laughter and light, but static and aftershock of silence trembling through the cutlery and glasses. The chandelier still burned overhead, but the glow had turned brittle, illuminating faces, too stiff hands, too still. Conversations that had once filled the air with rehearsed warmth faltered into whispers, then into nothing at all. It was as though a stagehand had walked onto the set mid-performance and laid the script bare truth written in black folders, truth that could not be unspoken. My departure from the table had cracked the surface. But the crack had not swallowed them whole. Not yet. They clung to their performance even as it sagged, patching smiles over fractures, shifting uncomfortably in chairs, suddenly too hard, too real. It was an outsider, a guest who broke the silence. He had no stake in the script except his audience, no investment except in appearances. His tie was too bright for his suit, his face glossy with wine. He leaned toward me as I returned from the hallway, my bag heavy against my hip. "You've been very helpful," he said, his voice oily with oblivion. Always so organized. "I told them earlier you're like their assistant, aren't you?" The word cut sharper than he knew. Assistant. An assistant doesn't bleed for family. An assistant is paid, thanked, dismissed at the end of a shift. I had been none of those things. I had been mined, drained, consumed, treated like a well that never ran dry, a vault that never locked a daughter who could be carved down until she was nothing but function. In his clumsy summary, the guest had spoken aloud what the family had always implied: I was not a member. I was a utility, a service, a role. I did not answer him. He did not deserve the courtesy. The family did not deserve my defense. His words hung in the air like smoke, unwanted but revealing. Instead, I turned to the woman who had birthed me. My mother sat rigid, her wineglass untouched, her face pale beneath the chandelier's gilded glow. For the first time that night, I saw her as age had made her lines etched deep as scars, eyes heavy with exhaustion, lips trembling at the corners of a mouth that had spoken so many verdicts but so few truths. And still, even in that moment, she reached for her weapon of choice language. Phrases worn thin by years of repetition, smoothed down like coins passed too often from hand to hand. "Family values," she whispered. Her voice wavered but carried a prayer recited out of habit, as if the phrase itself might restore order to the room. I stepped closer, the folder pressed against my ribs, heavy alive. "Family values?" I repeated, tasting the words like ash. "You mean obedience. You mean silence. You mean permission." Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. "It isn't like that. It has always been like that." My voice was calm, but each word cut precise, deliberate. Every debt disguised as generosity. Every erasure disguised as accident. Every insult disguised as humor. What you call values has always meant one thing: permission. My permission for you to use me. My permission for you to erase me. My permission for you to laugh at me and call it love. The air thickened, heavy as smoke. My brother-in-law shifted in his chair, his jaw tight. My sister's hand trembled against her glass liquid, trembling with it. Even the children, restless moments earlier, had fallen silent, their eyes wide, as if they sensed the room had crossed into territory, too raw, too sharp for play. I reached into my bag and withdrew the final envelope. White. Heavy. Unbending. I placed it on the table in front of my mother, sliding it forward across the linen with deliberate care, the way evidence is presented to a judge. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the lawsuit. Not a threat. Not a bluff. It is already filed. This envelope is only a courtesy, so you know what you voted against. Tonight was not family. It was the last of my permission." The room held its breath. My mother stared at the envelope as if it were a loaded weapon, one she had no training to disarm. Her hand twitched once, twice, but she did not touch it. She lifted her eyes to mine instead. They were wet, but not softened. "We are your family," she said again. But the words came weaker this time, drained of conviction. I leaned in, the years pressing through me, pressing through her. "I was your daughter," I said, low and steady. Until that meant permission. The sentence fell like a stone into still water. Ripples spread across the table, across the faces of everyone seated. My sister's eyes dropped to the tablecloth, unable to hold mine. My uncle's mouth opened as if to object, then closed again. Empty. The man in the too bright tie finally had the sense to say nothing at all. I straightened. The envelope lay untouched between us, white against the white linen, stark and undeniable. Proof of a boundary long overdue. Without another word, I turned toward the coat rack. My coat waited there, dark, simple, unremarkable, but steady as the night outside. I slid my arms into its sleeves, pulled it over my shoulders, buttoned it with slow, deliberate precision. My bag was already slung across me, heavier than before, but lighter too, because weight is not always measured in pounds. Sometimes weight is measured in permission, revoked chains broken. I walked toward the door. My steps did not falter. Behind me, no one called my name. No one rose to stop me. Not even my mother, who once would have clutched my wrist and whispered obligations into my skin like commandments. The latch clicked softly as I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and honest, slicing through the stale perfume of the dining room. The night greeted me like an ally. Outside, snow glittered across the driveway, cars capped with frost, the world untouched by the theater inside. I stepped across the threshold, pulled the door closed behind me. The voices inside resumed, muffled, fractured, desperate to patch the silence I had left in my wake. They did not rush to stop me because they knew they couldn't. The aftershock was theirs to endure. The withdrawal was mine to claim. I descended the steps slowly, each crunch of snow beneath my boots, steady as a heartbeat. The lodge loomed behind me, glowing falsely, its windows squares of gold pressed against the blackness of night. I did not look back. The air was cold, but for the first time in years, it felt like breathing. 2 weeks later, the air around me had changed. Not just the season, though. Winter still clung to the mornings with its crisp frost, but the atmosphere of my own life. The silence that had once been heavy and suffocating now felt deliberate, clean, like space cleared for something new. I sat in a doctor's office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. The nurse handed me a clipboard and a pen. Routine paperwork boxes to tick, lines to fill. Name, date of birth, insurance. Then the line that stopped me, emergency contact. For years I had written the same name in that space. My mother's. By reflex, my pen hovered, waiting to write it again. But the ink did not move. My hand stilled. The question wasn't just about emergencies. It was about trust, about who would be called when I couldn't speak for myself. And the truth was, I no longer wanted the person who erased me from slideshows, who voted me out of belonging, who saw me as permission rather than daughter. I wrote instead the name of my closest friend, the one who had answered late-night calls without judgment, who had shown up not with demands, but with presence. The letters curved across the page with a strange sense of finality, both an ending and a beginning. When I handed the clipboard back, I felt lighter, as though I had quietly signed myself into a new life. Over the following days, I dismantled what remained of their access. One by one, I revoked permissions accounts where I had been listed as proxy joint authorizations that had bound me to debts not my own financial ties, that had masqueraded as family bonds. Each click, each removed signature was a thread cut from a web that had held me too long. My email pinged with confirmation notices. Your authorization has been withdrawn. Your account is no longer linked. The language was bureaucratic cold, but I read those messages as small hymns of freedom. Then came the move. I packed what little I owned into boxes that did not overflow. Clothes, a few dishes. My books, the folder that had become my spine. I left behind the heavy furniture, the clutter that had once been demanded as proof of success, the objects chosen to impress, but never to comfort. The new apartment was smaller, but when I opened the blinds on the first morning, the light poured in unhindered. Sunlight stretched across the bare floor, golden and unfiltered, touching walls that held no shadows of old arguments. The space was empty enough to breathe, to expand, to imagine. I stood barefoot in that morning light and realized I owned nothing here but myself. And that was enough. I filled the place with silence first. Not the heavy silence of their disapproval, but the gentle kind, the silence that waits patiently like fertile soil. Slowly, I added sound: a kettle, whistling a song, drifting from a speaker, laughter shared with a friend, seated cross-legged on the bare floor as we ate takeout straight from cartons. The apartment did not need chandeliers or speeches. It needed only honesty. One evening, my phone lit with a message. From Mother, we miss you. 3 words typed as if they could undo decades. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the familiar sleight of hand erasure disguised as affection. The same playbook, another attempt at permission. I stared at the screen, the blue bubble glowing in the dark. For a moment, my chest tightened with the echo of the child I once was, the one who would have replied instantly, desperate for even scraps of inclusion. But the echo faded quickly, and in its place was something steadier, clarity. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. Some messages deserve the dignity of silence. Instead, I opened my journal. The same one where I had once cataloged debts turned pages into ledgers. Now its pages waited for something else. I picked up my pen and wrote a single line across the paper. Not what they did. What I learned. I set the pen down, closed the journal, and let the words rest there like a seed. Because this was no longer about their erasures or their votes. This was about my own reconstruction. My own redefinition. A life rebuilt not on permission, not on performance, but on truth that did not require applause to stand. And in that quiet apartment, lit by the early sun, surrounded by more space than things, I finally felt what I had been chasing all along. Not family as they defined it, but freedom as I now did. There comes a moment at the end of every storm when the air clears, not because the world has changed, but because you decide to breathe differently. This is that moment for me. Not the chaos of the dinner, not the tearing of the ledger, not even the vote that declared me erased. This moment is mine alone, the naming of what I learned, the declaration of what remains. 7 lessons carved into me like scars that no longer hurt, only remind. First, silence is not love. It took me years to understand that my quiet endurance was not loyalty. It was fuel for their erasure. Silence became the currency by which they rewrote the story. Never again. Second, kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. They called it generosity when I gave without limits. They called it selfishness the moment I said no. I now know the difference. Kindness with boundaries is love. Kindness without them is permission to be used. Third, receipts are not hostile. For too long, I let them convince me that keeping records was unloving, that writing things down made me cold. But memory without evidence is clay in the hands of liars. Receipts are not hostility. Receipts are history. Fourth, family is not guaranteed. Blood writes the introduction, but respect writes the story. Without respect, family is just a cage with gold-painted bars. Fifth, laughter can wound. The smirks, the applause, the clever little lines, they were daggers disguised as humor. I've learned to tell the difference between laughter that heals and laughter that erases. Sixth, removal is revelation. When they cropped me from the slideshow, when they left my name out of speeches, when they voted me out of their narrative, they did not erase me. They revealed themselves. And seventh, leaving is not failure. They taught me that staying was proof of love, that endurance was proof of worth. But leaving was the only way to stop being erased. Walking away was not betrayal. It was rebirth. All of it, every sting and every page has carried me here. To this sentence spoken not in anger but in certainty, I didn't fight for a chair. I built my own table. That table may be smaller, simpler, not gilded with chandeliers or polished speeches, but it is mine. Its wood is honesty. Its legs are boundaries. Its place settings are respect. And at that table, no one votes on my existence. So I turn now not to them, but to you. To the ones listening, watching, carrying your own ledgers of silence and survival. I ask you, have you been erased? Have you been laughed at? Cropped out, rewritten until your own memory feels suspect? If you know this story, if any part of it sounds like your reflection in a hallway mirror, then I invite you to answer. Comment 1 if you see yourself in these lessons. Comment 0 if you don't. Share this story if you know someone who needs to hear that. Silence isn't love, that receipts aren't hostile, that leaving is not failure. Because this isn't only my declaration. It's an archive waiting to connect with yours. And when the music fades, when the piano note softens into strings, and silence, let it be the kind of silence that is chosen, not imposed. The kind of silence that heals, not erases. The kind of silence that finally lets us breathe.